Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Leeson here. Today's top stories. 2 Indian delegates in the UK for G7 meetings test positive for COVID-19, causing the entire delegation to self-isolate. France threatens to cut Jersey's power supply over a dispute on fishing rights. And the political parties make the final dash ahead of tomorrow's bumper crop of elections. Indian Foreign Minister poured out at the face-to-face G7 meeting in London. This is after 2 members of his delegation tested positive for the CCP virus.
The group of 7 foreign ministers meeting in London was hit by a COVID-19 scare on Wednesday. This is the first face-to-face high-level G7 meeting for more than 2 years. But on Wednesday, 2 delegation members of India's team tested positive. Indian Foreign Minister Subramaniam Jaishankar said he will have to join the meeting online instead of in person. He wrote on Twitter, "As a measure of abundant caution and also out of consideration for others, I decided to conduct my engagements in the virtual mode." Labour leader Keir Starmer questions the government's decision to hold the meeting in person.
I do think we need to ask questions about how this happened, if only to make sure that it's not repeated. It is a reminder about how vigilant we need to be about our borders. We've been challenging the government on this for some months.
But Prime Minister Boris Johnson says it was right for ministers to meet face to face.
I think it's very important to try to continue as much business as you can as a government. We have a very important relationship with India, with our G7 partners.
India is not a G7 member, but was invited by Britain to attend. The 2 countries agreed on Tuesday on plans for a quantum leap in bilateral relations over the next decade.
The dispute between the UK and France over fishing rights escalates. France now threatens to cut power to Jersey over licenses to French fishermen.
France is threatening to cut off electricity to Jersey amid an escalating row over fishing rights in UK waters. The Channel Island is dependent on France for 95% of its electricity. French Maritime Minister Annick Girardin told the French Parliament on Tuesday that France is ready to enact retaliatory measures following unacceptable new rules for French fishing vessels. Girardin said, "I'm sorry it has come to this, but we will do so if we have to." French fishermen have complained that it's hard to get a licence to fish in UK waters. Last week, Jersey issued 41 licences to French vessels. France claims some rules for fishing off the Channel Islands were not part of the UK's Brexit agreement with the EU. The UK government says Jersey is responsible for its own territorial waters, and a Jersey minister said on Wednesday the dispute is based on a misunderstanding over the licensing system. Britain's trade deal with the EU following Brexit allows the bloc's fishermen to keep fishing deep into British waters, but only once they have received a licence. Fishing rights have been a source of dispute between France and the UK for months. Fishermen in northern France say their livelihoods depend on access to British waters, and British fishermen depend on access to the EU market to sell their product. Last month, French trawlermen, angered by the slow issuance of licences, blocked lorries carrying UK fish as they arrived in France.
In what's been dubbed as Super Thursday, a host of elections will be played out across England, Scotland and Wales. In London, voters will head to the polls to elect their mayor. Elections were delayed because of pandemic restrictions. Here's NTD's Jane Well with more.
It's the first set of major elections since the pandemic. Voters in Scotland and Wales will choose new parliaments. The vote in Scotland could be crucial to the future of the Union, with the Scottish National Party hoping for a second independence referendum. Earlier, Boris Johnson said it's not the time for a Scottish independence vote.
As we're coming forwards out of a pandemic together, this is not the time to have a reckless and I think irresponsible second referendum.
Police and crime commissioners will be elected in many areas of England. There are also 13 mayoral contests, including the battle for the London mayor. The Prime Minister and opposition leader Keir Starmer campaigned on the final day before the vote. Pandemic restrictions delayed a host of elections. In London, it means Labour's Sadiq Khan served for an extra year. A record-breaking 20 candidates are running for London Mayor. Sadiq Khan is running for a second term. His main challengers are Sean Bailey, Conservative, Louisa Porritt, the Liberal Democrats, and Sean Berry from the Green Party. It may take a few days longer to get all the results because of precautions taken for the pandemic. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The trial of two British veterans accused of murdering an official IRA leader in 1972 has collapsed because of inadmissible evidence. The ruling means that evidence in 7 other cases will now be reviewed.
Prosecutors are to examine the evidence in 7 other cases involving veterans in Northern Ireland following the collapse of the Joe McCann murder trial. In 4 of the cases, including Bloody Sunday, a decision to prosecute has already been taken. In the 3 other cases involving former military personnel, a decision is still pending. On Tuesday, the judge ruled on evidence provided by 2 British paratroopers accused of the murder of official IRA leader Joe McCann in 1972. The judge declared the evidence inadmissible. The 2 veterans, now in their 70s, were formally acquitted. McCann was wanted by the British Army and was involved in many shootings, including the 1972 attempted assassination of then Unionist official John Taylor. It was the first trial in years that involved charges against former military personnel who served in the Northern Ireland conflict. Supporters of the 2 veterans celebrated after the case collapsed. Former Defence Minister Johnny Mercer was outside the court to support veterans. He left the government in April after it emerged a new bill to protect soldiers from prosecutions would not include those who served in Northern Ireland.
These 2 soldiers' lives have been ruined over the last 10 years. I think it's deeply unfair. It's unfair on all sides. It only seems to make the legal teams happy who make a lot of public money from this. You know, the Prime Minister promised to introduce legislation to curb it. He needs to get on with it and do it.
Statements made by the defendants in 1972 could not be accepted because they were ordered to make them, and they were not conducted under caution. A second source of evidence was also ruled not legitimate. The McCann's family solicitor said they plan to apply to the Attorney General for an inquest into the killing.
From today, Oscar winners and Nobel laureates will find it easier to live and work here in Britain. Technology leaders and figureheads in arts and science are now able to fast-track their visas if they have the right trophy. The change is part of a post-Brexit revamp of the immigration system. Brexit saw the end to free movement of people with the EU and the need for new immigration rules. The government says the new points-based system aims to attract the best and brightest. Prizes listed in the Global Talent Visa route include those for computing, acting, and classical music. And in other news, a recent study shows more people experienced symptoms of depression during the 3rd lockdown than during the 2nd, especially young adults and parents with children.
The Office for National Statistics analysed the proportion of British adults experiencing depression during the 3rd lockdown. It found more than 20% of adults aged 16 and over experienced some form of depression from January to March this year. The rate is greater than during the 2nd lockdown in November, and more than double before the pandemic. The study found young adults and people living with a child had the largest increases in rates of depressive symptoms during the 3rd lockdown when compared with pre-pandemic levels. For adults aged 16 to 39 years, rates in early 2021 were more than double the rates before the pandemic. Adults aged 70 plus were least affected, with only 10% experiencing some form of depression. The data showed the older the people are, the less likely they experienced some form of depression. Compared to men, women were more likely to experience some form of depression across all age groups. Over 40% of women aged 16 to 29 years experienced depressive symptoms compared with 26% of men the same age. The data showed that nearly 40% of disabled adults experienced some form of depression during the third lockdown, compared with 13% of non-disabled adults. Adults who identified as clinically extremely vulnerable were also more likely to experience some form of depression than adults who were not clinically extremely vulnerable. The study also compared people's financial situation with their experience of depression. It found that the less people earned, the more likely they experienced depressive symptoms.
HMRC now wants to know how much Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies you own. That's if you are a taxpayer under investigation. NTD's Patrick Hayden takes a look.
Taxpayers under investigation by HMRC have to disclose any Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies they hold. It's always been a requirement to disclose all types of assets. But now a specific question has been added for crypto holdings on HMRC's Statement of Assets form. Taxpayers are also asked to provide details of community and informal bank accounts and foreign exchange accounts. Cryptocurrencies are hard for authorities to trace compared to traditional assets. HMRC does say, though, that crypto information provided will be checked. A spokesman says that HMRC will take robust action to make sure that everyone pays the tax due. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have soared in recent months. Capital gains tax will be due on any gains above the annual allowance of £12,300. Patrick Hayden, NTD News, London.
Banks are more likely to reject loan applications before lunch and around 5 p.m. A new study finds decision fatigue can lead credit officers to say no.
These are the findings of a new Cambridge study published on Wednesday. The study looked at 30 credit officers considering over 26,000 loan restructuring applications. Having to make difficult decisions over an extended period of time can lead to decision fatigue. People under decision fatigue tend to revert to the default decision, or whatever is easiest or safest. But it's not just banks that are affected. For example, previous studies showed that judges are less lenient the more time has passed since they took a break. And decision fatigue can make doctors prescribe unnecessary antibiotics.
Still to come, a new report says Chinese banks are funding deforestation around the world. It is putting the Chinese leaders' pledge to protect the environment into question. That and more when we return.